At 3:11 a.m. on May 8, 1943, two Gestapo agents climbed the narrow staircase to the attic of a farmhouse outside Rouen, France. Following a tip that a British airman was hiding in the rafters, the stairs creaked under their boots. The air smelled like dust and old hay. At the top of the stairs, trapdoor hung open, the darkness above. The first agent, criminal assistant Rolf Baumer, aged 34, raised his flashlight and stepped through the opening. The second agent, Klaus Dorn, aged 29, followed 2 steps behind, pistol drawn. Neither of them saw the rope. It was hemp, thin and dark, looped in a slip knot and suspended from a rafter by a counterweight system hidden behind a false beam. The moment Baumer's head cleared the trap door, his shoulders brushed a tripwire no thicker than fishing line, the counterweight released. The noose dropped over his head and snapped tight around his neck. A second later, the weight, a sack filled with 30 kilograms of river stones, plummeted down a concealed shaft inside the attic wall, yanking the rope with the force of a gallows drop. Baumer was jerked off his feet and hauled upward into the rafters so fast his flashlight spun out of his hand and shattered on the floor below. His neck didn't break, it crushed. Dorn heard the snap of the rope going taut, saw his partner's legs kicking in the air above him, and opened his mouth to shout. That's when the second noose dropped. This one had been positioned slightly lower, angled to catch anyone standing just inside the trap door. It settled over Dorn's head as he looked up, and when he tried to step back, his boot caught the edge of the trapdoor frame. He stumbled. The tripwire for the second counterweight engaged. Dorn was yanked sideways and upward, slamming into a rafter with enough force to crack 2 ribs before the noose pulled tight. His pistol clattered down the stairs by 3:13 a.m. Both men were suspended in the dark attic, throats compressed, legs twitching, hands clawing uselessly at the ropes around their necks. By 3:16 a.m., both were still. Downstairs, in the farmhouse kitchen, a man named Étienne Roux sat at the table with his hands folded, listening to the silence above. He'd built the attic rope snare over 4 nights using skills he'd learned in a profession no one associated with killing. Étienne Roux had been a stagehand. For 16 years, he'd worked in the Théâtre des Arts in Rouen, managing curtains, rigging fly systems, and operating the counterweight mechanisms that lifted scenery, backdrops, and actors 20 meters above the stage. He knew ropes, he knew knots, he knew how much weight it took to lift a man, how fast a counterweight could drop, and exactly how to rig a line so it moved invisibly until the moment it had to move very, very fast. When the war came and the Germans occupied Rouen in June 1940, the theater stayed open for a while. German officers attended performances. Propaganda plays were staged. Étienne kept working, rigging lines, adjusting weights, staying quiet. But by 1942, the theater had been repurposed as a storage depot and Étienne was out of work. He took odd jobs, repairing fishing nets, fixing farm equipment, helping a sailmaker in the harbor, and he started running messages for a small resistance cell operating out of a tobacco shop on Rue Jeanne d'Arc. His first assignments were simple: moving papers, hiding a radio operator for a night, passing along warnings when the Gestapo were sweeping a neighborhood. He was good at it because he understood timing, the way a stagehand understands cues. Know when to move, know when to freeze, know when the curtain dropped. In the winter of 1942, the cell started helping downed Allied airmen escape through the Comet Line, a network that smuggled pilots from occupied France through Spain to Gibraltar. It was dangerous work. The Gestapo had informants everywhere, and every safe house was a potential trap. That's when Étienne started thinking about the attics. Most safe houses in rural Normandy were old farmhouses with attics accessible only by narrow staircases or ladders. Perfect for hiding people, also perfect for getting raided. When the Gestapo came, they came fast, armed and in pairs. They'd kick in the door, sweep the ground floor, then head straight for the attic where they knew people hid. The standard resistance response was to run, fight, or hope. The airman could slip out a roof hatch before the Gestapo reached him. Étienne thought there had to be a better option. Why run from the attic when you could make the attic the trap? In February 1943, he proposed the idea to his cell leader, a former school teacher named Claudine Moreau, during a meeting in the back room of a butcher shop. What if we rigged the attic so that when the Gestapo came up the stairs, they walked into a snare, Étienne said. Claudine frowned. A snare? Like a rabbit trap. Like a stage trap, Étienne said. A counterweight system. I can rig a noose on a pulley, hide the rope in the rafters, and set a tripwire at the top of the stairs. When someone steps through the trapdoor, the wire releases a counterweight. The noose drops, tightens, and the weight hauls them up into the rafters. Fast, clean, silent. The room went quiet. A man in the corner, a dockworker named Morris, laughed uncomfortably. You want to hang Gestapo agents with theater rope. I want to make it so the first two men up the stairs never come back down, Étienne said. And I want the ones waiting below to hear nothing but silence, so they hesitate long enough for whoever's hiding in the attic to get out through the roof. Claudine stared at him. And you can build this without it being seen. I can build it in 4 nights, Étienne said. I've rigged heavier drops on smaller stages. I just need a farmhouse with an attic, access to the rafters, and 30 kilograms of weight per noose. Morris shook his head. This is madness. If it fails, if the rope breaks or the weight doesn't drop or they see it, we lose the safe house and everyone in it. If we do nothing, Étienne said quietly, we lose the safe house anyway. The Gestapo are getting bolder, smarter. They're not just checking attics anymore. They're staying up there searching, tearing apart floorboards. We need something that stops them the second they step inside. Claudine looked at the others. No one spoke. Finally, she nodded. 1 test, 1 farmhouse. If it works, we consider using it elsewhere. If it fails, we never speak of it again. Étienne nodded. I'll need 4 nights. The farmhouse belonged to a widow named Marguerite Allard. A narrow 2-story building with stone walls and a steep roof, 15 kilometers outside Rouen. Marguerite's husband had died in the Great War. Her sons were gone. One to a labor camp in Germany, one killed in 1940. She hated the occupation with a quiet, burning hatred that made her the kind of person the resistance could trust. When Claudine explained what Étienne wanted to do, Marguerite simply said, "Will it kill them?" "Yes," Étienne said. "Good," Marguerite replied. "Start tonight." Night 1, March 14th, 1943, 11:38 p.m. Étienne climbed into the attic through the trapdoor, carrying a coil of hemp rope, a hand drill, a saw, and a canvas sack. The attic was low and cramped, rafters running east to west, old beams dark with age. He worked by the light of a shielded oil lamp, measuring distances, checking angles, testing the strength of the beams. The principle was simple: a noose on a rope, threaded through a pulley mounted high on a rafter. The other end of the rope attached to a counterweight. When the counterweight dropped, it would pull the noose upward with enough force to lift a grown man off his feet. The trick was the trigger, and even if they survive the initial pull, they'll be unconscious in under a minute. Dead in 2. Morris shook his head slowly. You've turned this attic into a gallows. No, Étienne said quietly. I've turned it into a stage, and when the curtain drops, the audience doesn't get to leave. They didn't use the trap for a month. April passed. The cell moved 2 airmen through other safe houses, avoided a Gestapo sweep in the city, and lost a courier to an informant's tip. Then in early May, a new airman arrived. RAF pilot, shot down near deep, badly burned on his hands and face. He couldn't travel yet. He needed a place to hide for a week, maybe 2. Marguerite's farmhouse was the safest option. Étienne moved the pilot into the attic on May 4th, showed him the escape route, and told him, if men come up those stairs in the night, you stay absolutely still. Let the ropes do the work. Then you go through the roof. Understand? The pilot, a kid from Yorkshire who couldn't have been older than 22, nodded. What if the ropes don't work? Étienne looked at him. They'll work. May 7th evening. The informant's name was never confirmed, but someone talked. A Gestapo unit in Rouen received a tip that a British airman was hiding in a farmhouse outside the city. The report was specific. Location, description, even the detail that he was in the attic. At 2:50 a.m. on May 8th, a car rolled up the dirt road to Marguerite's farmhouse. No lights, 2 agents, Baumer and Dorn. They'd done this a dozen times. Kick in the door, sweep the ground floor. Head for the attic, fast and aggressive. Most people froze. Most didn't fight. At 3:04 a.m., they kicked in the front door. Marguerite was in her bedroom awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands folded. She said nothing. Baumer checked the ground floor. Nothing. He looked up at the ceiling, then at Dorn. Attic. They climbed the stairs, boots loud on the old wood. At the top, the trapdoor was already open. Baumer raised his flashlight and stepped through. His head broke the plane of the trapdoor. His shoulders brushed the tripwire. The release pin slipped free. The counterweight dropped. The noose fell over his head. pulled tight and yanked him upward into the rafters with a force that lifted him completely off the stairs. His flashlight fell. His hands clawed at the rope. His legs kicked. Dorn saw it happen, saw his partner jerking in the air above him, and froze for one critical second. Then he stepped forward, reaching up. The second tripwire caught him across the forehead. The second counterweight dropped. The second noose snapped tight around his neck and hauled him sideways into the rafters. His pistol hit the floor. His body slammed into a beam. The rope held. Both men hung in the dark, choking, twisting, feet dangling 2 meters above the trapdoor. In the corner of the attic, the raft pilot sat absolutely still, pressed against the chimney, watching 2 shadows struggle and then go limp. By 3:16 a.m., the attic was silent. The pilot waited another 2 minutes, just as Étienne had told him. Then he crawled to the roof panel, pushed it open, and slipped out into the night. He was gone before the Gestapo backup unit arrived at dawn. When the Germans finally entered the farmhouse at first light, they found Marguerite in the kitchen, calmly drinking tea. She said she'd heard nothing, seen nothing. Upstairs, they found the attic door open and 2 of their agents hanging from the rafters, ropes around their necks, faces purple, eyes wide. The ropes were crude. The knots were theater knots. The counterweights were sacks of river stones. A Gestapo investigator named Krantz spent 3 days trying to determine what had happened. His report, filed on May 12, concluded, agents Baumer and Dorn were killed by a mechanical snare trap of unknown origin, likely designed by someone with technical or engineering knowledge. Trap was triggered upon entry to attic space. No witnesses, no evidence of additional personnel on site. Recommend enhanced caution during attic searches. The farmhouse was burned. Marguerite was arrested, questioned for 2 weeks, and released when they couldn't prove she'd built the trap. She died in 1948, never having spoken a word about it. Étienne Roux kept building traps. In June 1943, he rigged a second attic in a farmhouse near Keene. In August, a third, in a barn outside Lisieux. The design spread quietly through resistance cells in Normandy. No one called it by an official name. Some called it the theater drop. Others called it Roux's rope. The Gestapo started sending 3 men into attics instead of 2, then 4. Then they stopped going into attics first. They'd burn buildings from the outside, or wait for daylight, or send in French collaborators ahead of their own agent. By late 1943, the attic snare had become enough of a ghost story that some Gestapo units refused to enter farmhouses with trapdoors, unless they had engineers sweep for wires first. After the liberation of France in 1944, a British SO officer compiling a list of resistance tactics came across a report about mechanical hanging traps in attic spaces used in Normandy. He tracked down Étienne in Rouen, found him working again at the Theater des Arts, which had reopened after the Germans left. "Is it true," the officer asked, "that you built traps that hang Gestapo agents?" Étienne was up in the rigging, adjusting a counterweight for a backdrop. He looked down at the officer and said, "I built stages. Whether someone walked onto them was their choice." The officer wrote it down. The report was filed and classified. No formal record of the attic snare ever made it into official SO documentation. But in the decades after the war, stagehands and riggers across Europe occasionally heard whispers about the man in Rouen who'd used fly systems to kill Nazis. Some thought it was a myth. Others knew better. Étienne Roux worked at the Théâtre des Arts until 1964, when age and arthritis finally forced him to retire. He died in 1970, age 68. His obituary in the Rouen papers described him as a talented stagehand and quiet contributor to the cultural life of the city. No mention of the war, no mention of ropes. At his funeral, a woman in her 70s approached the casket and placed a small coil of hemp rope on top of it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She'd been Claudine Moreau, the cell leader who'd approved the first trap. And in a small museum in Normandy dedicated to the French resistance, there is a single photograph on a back wall. It shows the interior of an attic, rafters visible, a trapdoor in the floor. The caption reads, "Location unknown. Method counterweight snare." Used by resistance cells in rural Normandy, 1943-44. Designer unconfirmed. But the stagehands know, and the riggers know. And somewhere, in the technical notebooks kept by theater workers who study the old systems, there are sketches of a pulley rig that moves faster than gravity should allow. They call it Roux's drop. And they remember the stagehand who turned the rafters into a killing floor and walked away before the curtain call.